Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Kerry Agnello. I'm a board-certified family physician, currently practicing at Fort Bragg here in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and I have been there since 2010. Since 2013, I have also been the school physician for the Anderson Creek Academy Charter School up in Spring Lake, and I am also on their board of directors. So I've been here in North Carolina since 2010, almost 11 years now, and prior to that I was a residency faculty member at the Warren Hospital Family Medicine Residency in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. And while there, I worked in the hospital, in the office, in the nursing homes. I took care of patients, in the intensive care units. I taught residents, and I also taught medical students. So COVID-19 and these new vaccines that are out there are very near and dear to my heart. And I am, very happy to be here today to talk to you today about COVID-19, the new vaccines, and hopefully answer questions that are essentially the most common questions that have been given to me in the office setting or in the community setting. So my husband and I and our daughter Claire are parishioners here at C's, and I'm also on the parish council. So certainly you'll probably see me at Mass outside under the tent, and you can certainly come and talk to me anytime. So I'm hopeful that today's message that I'm delivering is a message of hope. Okay, I think we need some of that right now with COVID-19 and where we are. And I think that I can bring that to you today. I think that hopefully by the end of this talk, you will feel that you have enough information to make a decision about whether this vaccine is right for you. I'm hopeful that you'll feel the same way I do, that it is safe and effective. And that really is my hope for today. So I will start by saying this. After months and months of reviewing data about COVID-19, learning about these vaccines, reading about these vaccines, listening to vaccine experts and epidemiologists and colleagues of mine, I am absolutely convinced that these vaccines are safe, effective, and are very likely the pathway to the other side of this pandemic. They are very likely going to prove to be safe and effective long term, okay? But with that being said, I remain humble. I continue to read, I continue to review data, because although the technology that was used for these vaccines, which is a messenger RNA technology, we're going to talk a little bit about that, that technology is not new per se, but that technology has never been used in the general public for a vaccine before. So yes, this is new. I think that for us to feel hesitant or to have curiosity or ask questions, I think it's valid, I think it's expected, I think it's what you should be doing, okay? But with that being said, to those of us who have received the vaccine, okay, I am fully vaccinated now. I've had 2 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. I think to those of us who are in the middle of all of the data, we're pretty convinced that it appears to be safe and effective and probably a revolutionary change in medicine. This will probably transform medicine. And I could cry, but I think this is probably Nobel Prize winning technology. Okay, so what do we want to talk about? Let's talk a little bit about vaccine history, okay? I think that in order to answer everybody's questions and really get to the end of this talk, we have to learn a little bit about vaccines. And I think that by laying the foundation for you, I'm hopeful that there will be very few questions left once we do that. So arguably, if you look in the CDC website, vaccination is the greatest public health achievement in the last 100 years, okay? So if you look at the website, you'll see that from 1900 to 2000, vaccines saved more lives and reduced morbidity and mortality in more people than improving workplace safety, motor vehicle safety. You know, vaccines really are way above any of those other public health advancements. And then if you look at even the last 20 years, from 2000 to now, vaccines remain the greatest public health achievement of our time. Okay, they reduce morbidity, mortality, and save more lives than cancer prevention technologies, heart disease prevention, maternal fetal medicine advancements. Vaccination is an incredible gift to all of us. So looking back, how did vaccines start, right? So the very, very first vaccine was back in the 1790s when Edward Jenner said, let me take this little material from a cowpox blister and scratch open the arm of a little boy and shove that material in there and see if he gets smallpox, right? So he wasn't even using the smallpox virus, he was using the cowpox virus, but miraculously that child did not get sick, never got smallpox. And that's really how the idea of vaccines was born. The idea of taking a material or a virus in its tiniest form or in its most attenuated or inactive form, putting it inside of you and allowing your immune response to be stimulated to create antibodies against that foreign material, okay? And when your body does that, not only does it produce protection against what was put inside of you, but it creates memory of that material, so that when your body sees the real thing later down the line, it says, hey, I know you, I don't like you. And it stamps it out quickly before it can set up shop and make you sick or have you develop the illness. So, like for example, you know, when we have some of the vaccines that we have now have been born out of this, okay? So this technology, this idea. So like for measles, for example, in 1941 we had 895,000 measles cases. You know, enter a vaccine for measles, and in 2018 I think we had 300 cases of measles. And that's not because the measles vaccine doesn't work, it's because there is a subset of the population that does not believe that they would want that vaccine, so they don't get it. So we haven't eradicated measles yet, but from 895,000 down to 300, I think we can say that that vaccine is effective, okay? In 1952, polio, right? That one year we had 21,000 cases of polio. Now we have none, okay? We have essentially eradicated polio through this technology of vaccination. So when you know all of this about public health and you know all of this about vaccines and what they do, the idea of allowing a virus to somewhat burn through the population and infect as many people as it's going to infect, and hopefully we'll get to the other side once everybody has natural immunity, it's kind of an unacceptable thought, because it comes at an extremely high cost with a virus like COVID-19, okay? So let's look at just yesterday. So worldwide, yesterday, we have 102 million cases of COVID-19 and 2.2 million deaths from COVID-19 across the world. In the United States, we have 26 million cases of COVID-19, and unfortunately yesterday we crossed the threshold of 450,000 people who have died from this virus. So that's really unacceptable. So when we knew this, well, we didn't think this was going to happen, but when we knew how severe this virus was back in March, we said, oh my goodness, we probably need to develop a vaccine as quickly and as safely as possible, because it is probably going to be the only way out of this, okay? And what scientists also looked at, and doctors as well, is we said, look, it's not just about dying from this this virus also it's a scary virus. It has an extremely high morbidity level, okay? So this virus, about 80% of the people who get it, so about 4 out of 5 people, are going to have either a very low symptoms, or they're just going to feel quite sick for 10 to 14 days, and then they're going to recover, okay? So they may have cough, some shortness of breath, extreme fatigue, headache, but after about 2 weeks, they're going to get well and recover. But unfortunately, for about 1 in 5, 1 in 6, 15 to 20% of the population, they're going to have a longer course of illness, a much more severe course of illness. So even if they don't die, that doesn't mean they're not going to have long-term effects. So what we know about this virus is that it can cause pneumonia, which is a chest infection, right, that requires steroids, antibiotics, inhalers, and if it persists, it may require hospitalization, oxygen, and ventilation, okay, on a ventilator. I had a friend who had COVID-19 in April. She is still short of breath cleaning her house now. So that is morbidity. That is an example of morbidity, long-term symptoms from something that affected you a while ago. So the other thing that this virus does that's pretty scary is that it causes vasculitis. It causes inflammation in the blood vessels, and that can lead to clotting, like clotting in the lungs. We call that pulmonary emboli. It can lead to clotting in other organs and affect the liver and kidney and cause failure. It can cause heart attacks. It puts a lot of strain on the heart. It can cause rhythm disturbances of the heart rate. I mean, look at athletes who have had COVID. They go through very rigorous testing to be able to return to the field because of these morbidity effects of the virus. The virus can cause strokes. So it's scary. Scary enough for me to be very thankful that these vaccines are here. So let's talk about very traditional vaccines. Okay, so how are they made? And because I think if we know how those are made, you can kind of see why this one could be made so quickly and still be effective. Because I think that's been the biggest question I've gotten is, how could this have been done so quickly and still be effective? What? That doesn't seem right to me. So I think that this will help answer some of those questions. So traditional vaccines, let's talk about polio, tetanus, flu shots, okay? What you do is you take the virus and you grow it out in culture. Okay, now that takes time. Okay, to grow a virus out in culture takes time. And to grow it out in mass takes even more time. Okay, then what you do with it is you have to kill it. Crush it, kill it, break it all down so that it's no longer active. Okay, then you have to purify it. Okay, remember when we talked about Edward Jenner before? He basically took material and put it into a child. I mean, that's not pure. Okay, so now we purify it. We put it into a medium like salt water that can be put into your body. We have to manufacture that. So that whole process takes a ton of time, okay? And each virus or bacteria that we're trying to create a vaccine for is unique, right? Tetanus is different from polio. So the process by which they have to be grown, killed, purified, and manufactured is different for each one of those. So each part of the process has to be approved by the FDA. They need separate money for each of those phases. With messenger RNA technology, it's the same process every single time. So that is actually one of the obstacles that with this new technology for vaccines, that's one of the reasons why this actually could have been done so quickly. So that's one thing, okay? And then, so what is messenger RNA? Okay, so I think it's a pretty cool molecule. It's probably one of my favorite molecules. So messenger RNA is a molecule that we have in our bodies, and it is a means by which we make proteins, okay? So essentially the messenger RNA has a little message on it, like a little code, almost like an email, okay? And it goes into the cell and it delivers the message. It says, here I am with my message, and here's the instructions in the open the message, here's the instructions, make this protein. And your body says, okay, I make the protein. Okay, so that is how messenger RNA works. And scientists were able to isolate messenger RNA back in 1961. They knew that this is what messenger RNA was, and that this is what messenger RNA did. So it was even back then that scientists are starting to think, wow, if we could just find a way to give this messenger RNA the message to go in and kill that virus or kill that cancer cell, we could get somewhere with this messenger RNA, okay? The problem was that messenger RNA itself is very fragile, it's very delicate, and it degrades very, very quickly, okay? So I always like to think about it, I was learning about it in medical school and stuff, that it's kind of like Mission Impossible when the tape would play and then it would self-destruct. 3, 2, 1, boom, self-destruct. So essentially messenger RNA is so delicate that when it gets into the cell and delivers the message, its job is done and it degrades and dies, okay? So it is very fragile. So scientists said, wow, it would be so neat if we could find a way to make it less fragile, because the possibilities here are endless. I mean, we could give this messenger RNA a message, detailed instructions to go do something. If we could just get it into the cell, that would be incredible. So basically, scientists have been working for decades to learn how to stabilize messenger RNA and somehow put it into a medium where we could use it in some way. So in 2005, when SARS virus happened, they started to have a reason to potentially start figuring out how to do this a little bit better. So what they actually figured out sometime in that decade, 2005 to 2008, 2010, they actually figured out that if they put the messenger RNA with the message on it into a little fat particle, like a little oil droplet, it could be stabilized. Okay, and maybe if we take that fat droplet and put it into the body, it would travel to the cell and get inside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to answer a question right now, okay? So when you take butter and you put butter out on the counter at room temperature, after a few hours it softens, right? So that is partially why these vaccines need to be kept at such cold temperatures, because the mechanism by which this little messenger RNA and message gets into the cell is inside this little oil particle, this little fat droplet. We actually call it a lipid nanoparticle, okay? So if that gets warm, it destabilizes and falls apart and the messenger RNA will degrade. So some people have asked why it has to be kept so cold. That is why, okay? So this technology has been around. Okay, this is not new technology. As a matter of fact, Moderna, who is one of the 2 companies that has this vaccine, they were using this technology, the messenger RNA inside the fat droplets, to try to produce immune therapy for cancer cells. They've been trying to do this for years. That is the foundation of their company, it's what they do. So this technology has been there. They just haven't had enough demand to go forward and produce a vaccine for it, right? Because what happened? SARS kind of phased out. It stayed in one region of the world. They were effective in that region at kind of stamping it out, and it really didn't spread. It didn't escalate to global pandemic status like COVID-19 has. And then when MERS happened in 2012, they started to work a little harder on this technology, maybe make the nanoparticles cost less money and even be more stable. They've been working on that for a while. But then again, MERS kind of phased out. So, you know, your company is not going to give you millions of dollars to develop vaccine technology when there is not a need for it, right? There has to be a need on the other side. If we spend this $1 million, are people going to need this vaccine on the other side of all of our trials? It's a lot of risk that a company has to take. So what ended up happening was this technology kind of goes on the shelf until now, okay? So enter COVID-19. So December 2019, this virus, this novel wild-type coronavirus is isolated in China. By January 2020, They had sequenced the virus out. And when they were looking at it in sequence, they said, hey, this looks a lot like SARS. This looks a lot like SARS from 15 years ago. Remember that? We knew how that worked. It had this tiny, tiny little spike protein on it, and that was the business end of the virus. That was the part of the virus that got into our bodies and wreaked havoc, okay? So COVID-19, this coronavirus was doing that exact same sequencing. So essentially, they isolated that little tiny spike protein. So you've seen the virus on the news, right? It's a sphere, and it's got all these little spikes that stick off of it. Well, those spikes are the angry part of the virus. That's the part of the virus that we don't want. It's the part that lets it get into our body, into our cells, and cause us to get sick, okay? So the scientists, literally in January, February of 2020, they said, if we just take the little code, just that short little code for the spike protein, and we put it on a messenger RNA, and we put it in a fat droplet, and we inject it into the body, and then we expose that person to coronavirus, will they get sick? Okay, now you can't really do that because you're not going to expose a person to coronavirus. So they actually did it with chimpanzees. And they did a few trials in the chimpanzees, and the chimpanzees did not get sick. And they went, oh my goodness, this is going to work, okay? So as soon as they did that, the scientists at BioNTech, which is a very tiny company, called their contacts at Pfizer and said, we might have something here. Because Pfizer is a large company, right? They can manufacture things, they can take away certain obstacles with respect to money. So that partnership was born between BioNTech and Pfizer, okay? And at the same time, Moderna is saying, we're using this technology for cancer cells, why can't we use it for vaccine technology? So they start working, okay? And by March and April, when our country is all shut down, the NIH, Dr. Fauci, the administration, everybody's getting on board and saying, okay, Pfizer and Moderna and BioNTech have this technology. It looks relatively promising. It's not really new, but we've never used it in vaccines before. What do you think? And they basically said to the companies, you know what? You make it, we'll buy it. So it takes kind of the financial risk off the table, okay? So now I'm hoping that as this lecture is going on, you're starting to see why this could be done more quickly, okay? So let's think about it. What are some of the obstacles that exist for producing vaccines and getting through all these trials, okay? So in order to create a vaccine and get it licensed and approved, you have to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials, okay? So what are some of the obstacles? So number one, you have to have disease data, right? You have to know that the disease has a high mortality or high morbidity rate, and that it's infecting a lot of people in order to justify that you need to make a vaccine, okay? So for something like Hep B, chicken pox, it may take years to get enough data to prove that it's vaccine worthy, okay? So, well, that obstacle was taken off the table immediately. We knew in March and April that it was vaccine worthy, so that obstacle gone, okay? The second obstacle, money, okay? The government took that obstacle away. They said, you make it, we'll buy it. Your risk is gone. You don't have to do a phase 1 trial and then wait and hope that someone's going to say that you're justified to do phase 2. We're just going to buy it, so go ahead. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So here we are. The next thing that happens is that think about phase 3 trials. So phase 3 trials are the randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials where you are actually taking this product that you've created and putting it into people's arms, okay? So it can take years to recruit people to go into these trials, okay? It can take years because when you enter these trials, it's not easy. It's days off from work, you have to go and get blood work done, you have to get stuck, then you have to get blood work done, you know, maybe at 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then you have to get another shot, you know, so it's not like people are knocking down the doors of some of these companies to say, hey, I want to be in a vaccine trial. Well, COVID-19 happens, people were knocking down the doors of Pfizer and Moderna and saying, put me in your trial. So they were able to recruit the people that they needed for the vaccine trials very quickly. That obstacle eliminated, okay? So any medication and vaccine trial is going to have several thousand people in the trial, okay? And these trials had just as many people as any of those large trials, okay? So I don't want you to think that we cut corners on these trials. We did a full phase 3, well not we, I was not part of this, but they did a full phase 3 trial, both Pfizer and Moderna, from start to finish. And that is how you identify if something is safe and effective, is a phase 3 trial, okay? So let's look at some of the data, okay? So for Pfizer, they enrolled 44,000 people in their trial, and then you split that group in half. 22,000 get vaccine, 22,000 get saltwater or some kind of placebo product where they don't actually get vaccine. And then you look at data, okay? So you check how many people got sick. So out of the 44,000 people in the Pfizer group, 170 of those people got COVID, okay? But 162 of them didn't get the vaccine. They were in the placebo group, the non-vaccine group. So only 8 people who got vaccine actually got COVID. And only one of those people got severe COVID. And that person didn't die, that person recovered. That's remarkable. Moderna had very similar results. They had 30,000 people in their trial. Split them in half, give half the vaccine, half the placebo. 185 people got COVID out of that 30,000, but only 11 were in the vaccine trial, okay? So that's how you get 95% effectiveness. That is how you get that kind of number. So is it effective? Heck, yes, definitely effective, okay? Then we look at safety, okay? So a lot of questions about safety. How can we know that this is safe? Well, this is what we know so far, okay? What we know so far is that pretty much anytime you're doing a medication trial or a vaccine trial, adverse events, like serious adverse events, occur during the times of the trials, okay? Anytime in the past, that's what we see. That's why we do the trials, right? To see what the adverse events are. And we really didn't have many, okay, during the time of the trial. Now, Commissioner Hahn, you know, when this was going to go towards emergency use authorization and start getting reviewed, they said, you know what, even though we know that most of these adverse events are going to occur during the trial, let's wait 2 more months before we approve it, which is why this had to wait until December to go to the review board to see if it was going to get approved. So yes, we do have some safety data. So what ends up happening to patients is, yes, when you get the shot, like, because it is stimulating an immune response in your body, there are expected side effects such as headache, nausea, fatigue, sometimes fever, and joint pains, muscle aches. But that just means that your body is effectively creating an immune response to the vaccine. That means your body's doing what it's supposed to do. That's not an adverse event. That's an expected result. That means it's probably effective in your body. Adverse events are death, heart attacks. So even allergic reactions, anaphylactic reactions, anaphylaxis, those occur, but they are treatable, okay? And they happen within the first 30 minutes after you receive a vaccine. So if you have a history of severe allergy to something, and your doctor has approved you to get it, you're generally going to be monitored, have your EpiPen there, they may even pre-treat you with certain medications, but that's very treatable. That's something that you can recover from. So in these vaccines, so in most historical vaccines, we will see a rate of anaphylactic reactions at about 3 per million. And in these, it's 11 per million. So it's a little bit higher, but I don't know, 11 per million is still really good odds when the chance of getting COVID is so much higher and the chance of getting severe COVID is so much higher. But we'll talk a little bit more about the severe allergy when we finish up the lecture and do some questions, because it is important to talk about that a little bit more. So with the data that we had at that time, efficacious and likely very safe, okay? So no matter what though, even when people are sitting at the table reviewing data and deciding if they're going to approve this to the mass public, they always take pause. So even though the data looks great, usually vaccine experts will say until the first 3 million doses are out there in the world, we're not going to take a deep breath, okay? We still would like to see about 3 million doses get out there. So where are we today? Well, as of yesterday, 90 million doses have been delivered worldwide, and in the United States, 28 million doses have been delivered. So we are well beyond the 3 million doses. I think that most people are taking a deep breath now and saying, okay, you know, we've had very few serious adverse events, and we believe it's efficacious. So what we don't know is long-term efficacy and long-term safety. But in the history of traditional vaccine technology, like I said, these events occur during the trials. They're not years and years down the road, and there is really no theoretical reason for us to believe that this mRNA technology is going to have some long-term adverse effect. But with that being said, we do not yet have long-term safety data. They're building it month by month, and you know, each month that goes by, we're going to have more data. So, so with that, I think you have full background, and now I think we can get into some of the questions about safety, efficacy, and kind of where we are. Why is it 2 shots instead of 1 shot? I did answer why it has to be kept so cold, so 1 question is down. But let's talk a little bit about, you know, let's talk about 1 shot versus 2 shots. So essentially, you know, with hepatitis B, you need 3 shots. With HPV, you need 3 shots. With this vaccine, it's 2 shots, okay? So they figured this out in the phase 1 trials. Those are called the dose ranging trials. And they basically figure out what dose and what range in between the doses is going to be the most effective, okay? So this is very interesting because with Moderna, 1 vaccine shot, 1 shot of COVID-19 confers 80% effectiveness of immunity. So when you see that data, you say, oh good, I don't need a second dose. 80% is great. I feel good about that. Those are great odds, okay? But what happens is you get this very robust immune response, but your body doesn't remember what that looked like, okay? So you might get a great immune response for a couple of months, but then it's going to wane off, and your body's not going to remember what it looked like, the spike protein, when you actually see the virus, okay? So the second shot confers up to 95% efficacy of immunity and memory, okay? So the second shot is where we got memory T cells produced, and now we're pretty sure that you're going to have a much longer, robust immune response than if you had only had the first shot. So with Pfizer, after the first shot, it's about 55% immunity, and after the second shot, 95% immunity and memory, okay? So that's why 2 shots versus 1. You can't mix and match the 2. They're different molecules, okay? So even though mRNA is a similar molecule, you know, the lipid nanoparticle is not the same between Moderna and Pfizer. So if you get Pfizer, you have to get your first and second shot of Pfizer. Moderna, first and second shot of Moderna. But both vaccines are very similar technology and equally effective, okay? So then let's talk about how many people are truly immunized and how many people need to be immunized to start seeing disease transmission reduction, okay? So here we are. So as of yesterday, we have fully immunized 1% of the United States population, okay? Most of them are healthcare workers, nursing home residents, patients over 75, Okay, now we're also immunizing 65 and over, but most of those patients have only had the one shot, the second shot's coming. So fully vaccinated is about 1%, okay? And you need to get to approximately 60% vaccinated before you're really gonna start seeing reduction of disease transmission. What herd immunity is when you have vaccinated the herd, you've vaccinated the group, okay, and that group has enough protection to protect the one over here that couldn't get the vaccine, okay? So in this case, a child, right? Children are not approved to get this vaccine at this time. So how many people do we need to vaccinate to protect those who cannot get the vaccine? And that number is closer to 80-85% of the population, okay? And remember, we're at 1%, fully vaccinated right now. We're also, I'm not fully doom and gloom, we are also probably at 20% of the population probably has some natural immunity to COVID because they had it already. So maybe we're at 21%, but we need to get to 60 to start seeing any kind of flattening of the curve, and we probably need to get to 80-85% vaccinated before we're truly going to be able to start protecting those who can't get vaccinated. Okay, so we have a long way to go. We really do. And that is really why I'm hopeful that if you have any hesitancy, that this lecture helped you feel like, okay, it seems very safe, it appears to be effective, and I realize that if we're going to really try to get to the other side of this pandemic, we have to get as many people vaccinated as possible. So I think I'm going to line up when it's my turn. That's really my hope with this information that I'm providing today. So now let's talk about severe allergies a little bit. So listen, not every allergy is exactly the same, and not every severe allergy is the same. So like for example, this vaccine does not have peanuts in it, okay? So if you are allergic to peanuts, then your allergist is probably going to recommend that you get the vaccine, okay? They may want to pre-treat you with a little bit of medication beforehand. They may want you to take your EpiPen with you, and you're going to have to wait about 30 minutes in the site, the vaccine site where you get the vaccine, to be monitored in case you do have a reaction, okay? But if you have an actual allergy to one of the ingredients in the vaccine, that's a little bit different, okay? And that's something that you're going to have to talk to your allergist about, because you may not be able to get the vaccine. So that's the importance with that. I already kind of gave you the numbers. Traditional vaccines, we see anaphylactic reactions about 3 per million. With these two new COVID vaccines, we're at about 11 per million. So it is not terribly high at all, but it's very slightly higher than what we see in traditional vaccines. Okay. So another big question I've gotten is, I'm immunocompromised, okay? My immune system doesn't work very well. So should I get the vaccine, okay? So, or I have a disease like Crohn's, and I take Humira, which is a medication that suppresses my immune system. Should I get the vaccine? Well, and this is a conversation that you can have with your doctor. So I'm certainly recommending it. But again, these are individual decisions and individual discussions to have with your doctor. So here's the idea. It appears to be safe for you. The question becomes, is it efficacious? Okay, because in order for the vaccine to be effective, you have to be able to mount an immune response against the virus. Okay, your body has to be able to make spike protein from the little message, and then have your body fight the spike protein so that when it sees the real spike protein, it kills it. So if your immune system is really sub-threshold or not working very well, you may not mount a 95% effective response. You might mount a 50% response or 60%, but you may not mount the full response. So it's a discussion, it's a risk-benefit, but it's likely not going to harm you. It's likely just that you may not get the most robust response to the vaccine. Okay, so that's a discussion to have with your doctor. Another question I get frequently is, okay, I had COVID, should I get the vaccine? Can I get the vaccine? So the answer is yes, but there are some caveats, okay? So if you had COVID, you certainly don't want to get the vaccine while you're in isolation or while you're sick, okay? Because your immune system is already compromised. So again, you're not going to mount the response that you need. Plus, we don't want you exposing people at the vaccine center to COVID. So basically, if you had COVID and it was a course where you were able to kind of stay home, battle through the virus, you're now well, you're past the 10-day isolation period and probably the 14-day full recovery, you can go get the vaccine, okay? What they actually found in the trials was people did get COVID in the trials, and even before some of the trials, and they didn't exclude these people from going through the trials. So what they actually found was they measured the natural immunity that patients had from having COVID, and then they measured their immunity after they had the vaccines, and they actually had a better immune response after the vaccine than they did from natural immunity from COVID. So we are recommending that you get it, because it does appear that you'll have a more long-term immune response and a more robust immune response. The immunity from having COVID-19 seems to wane after about 90 to 120 days, that natural immunity. So the chance of reinfection is going to be there potentially in the future. So yes, we're recommending the vaccine. Another caveat is that if you had severe COVID and you ended up maybe in the hospital and you had to receive either convalescent plasma or monoclonal antibody treatment, Regeneron, you have to wait 90 days from those treatments before you can have the vaccine, okay? Because the idea behind that is that you were given a ton of antibody, a ton of protective mechanisms to fight that virus off. And those antibodies are still circulating in your body until they degrade after 90 days or so. So if we give you the vaccine, your body's just going to chew it up, and you're never going to create the memory response that we need. So that's why you have to wait 90 days if you've had those. But yes, if you've had COVID, you are eligible and you should. You just may have to wait 14 days versus 90 days, but you can get it. Okay? So another question I always get is about children. When are children going to be able to get it? Are children going to be able to get this vaccine? So I don't know about you, but I've been extremely thankful that children are, thank goodness, on the percentage of our population that gets a much less severe course of this illness. Because as of right now, they're starting to enroll children in these trials, but I'll tell you, there aren't as many children, getting lined up to go into these trials as there were adults, okay? And that's understandable. So it's probably going to take a little bit longer to get the data we need for children about safety and efficacy in children, and to figure out when and if we can immunize them as well. So for now, I think I said this before, but that's a huge reason why we should all be immunized, is because we can maybe protect them. Okay. Variants and mutations. So we know there is a UK variant, there's a variant out of South America, and there's a variant out of South Africa, okay? So here's the good news. With this mRNA technology and these vaccines, what you can do is when you get a variation of the virus, because the virus is going to mutate, right? It's going to mutate to try to survive. That is what it's doing. It wants to get into as many people as possible and infect us. It's not necessarily trying to kill all of us, because a virus wants to survive, and if it kills all the hosts, it can't survive. So it tries to mutate in ways that helps it become more contagious and more infectious. The good news is that because we have this technology with sequencing viruses, we can take that type of variant, sequence it, give it to the Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and use the vaccine on it and see if it works. Okay, see if it neutralizes that variant. So it appears that as of right now, these current vaccines neutralize the variant from the UK, and they seem to neutralize the variant from Brazil. But apparently, it's not neutralizing the South African variant as well. So there's still some response, but it's about a 6-fold reduction of immune response with the South African variant. And that came out of Moderna. Moderna did published that little bit of information last week. So, moving forward, what Moderna can do is they can now make a booster, vaccine that protects us against that variant. But we just produced this vaccine. I understand that we don't really want this to mutate so quickly that we can't keep up with it. But that's where we are right now. We don't know much more. I certainly don't think that should say don't get the vaccine, right? Because we're still going to get protected against the majority of the variants out there, plus still going to get some protection against this variant. This variant may not become the dominant one that's out there spreading everywhere, so I don't think it changes my mind with respect to getting the vaccine. Absolutely get it, but understand that it is going to mutate. There may be boosters that are necessary down the line, and those studies are ongoing. Okay, pregnancy and breastfeeding. So in the trials, there were actually 36 people who either got pregnant or were pregnant during the trial. They either didn't know they were pregnant at the beginning of the trial when they got recruited in, or they got pregnant during the trial. And so far, no adverse events that we're aware of with any of those patients that got the vaccine. So that is all we have, though. So, it's a conversation to have with your doctor. It appears safe. It appears effective. It appears like there's no theoretical evidence that it would be problematic. But can I tell you that with scientific evidence? No, I can't, because they didn't do the trials specifically in pregnant patients. Same thing with patients who are breastfeeding. But theoretically, looking at the science, it does not appear that there would be a conflict or a contraindication with these vaccines if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Individual decision and decision to make between you and your doctor. So the last of the questions I think that comes up is, can I get COVID with this vaccine? So there is no virus in the vaccine itself, right? The vaccine itself is just a message for one part of the virus, the spike protein. That is all it is. So when you get this vaccine, you can't get COVID, from the vaccine. What you're doing is you're going to take the message into the cell, the instructions tell the cell to make spike protein. Your body then makes antibodies against spike protein so that when it sees the real spike, it kills it, So that's all it's doing. So you can't get COVID from the vaccine. But can you get COVID after the vaccine? Well, yes, So, but probably not severe COVID, and, likely very, very short and very low symptom type course. I think what you have to realize is that this vaccine does not prevent us from inhaling COVID and having it get into our bodies. As a matter of fact, when it gets into our bodies, that's when our bodies says, hey, I've seen that in the vaccine and I'm going to kill it right now. Boom. So if you don't have the vaccine, it takes your body days to recognize it, days to realize that it's foreign, produce antibodies, and kill it. And that's the whole illness time. That's the 10 to 14 days of illness. And as long as it doesn't, have you deteriorate into a very severe course of illness, you're going to recover at that point. With the vaccine, you're going to be able to do that whole process in a couple of days. So probably before it sets up shop and makes you sick. But the truth of the matter is, yes, you can still get COVID, which is why, and we're not sure if you can spread it, which is why we are recommending masks and social distancing even after the vaccine. My hope is that as we get more data and more people vaccinated, that those recommendations are going to be able to change, because we're going to have such a reduction of transmission that we really won't be seeing as much symptomatic COVID out there. So I hope that answers that question. And then I think that that's all the questions that I had been given. So overall, in closing, I think that I'm hopeful that this information, if you had been maybe on the fence about getting the vaccine, that hopefully you have enough information now to make a solid decision about it, okay? I think that it's always going to be about weighing risks and benefits. You know, weighing the risks of getting COVID, the risks of getting severe disease with COVID, and then the risks of getting the vaccine. Is it safe? Is it effective? You know, and then deciding which is going to be best for you and for the community. So with that, if you have decided that you would like to get the vaccine, then you can go to the website for the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So that's going to be www.ncdhhs.gov, and they have vaccine scheduling by county and where you can get the vaccine, and you know what phase we are in of vaccine distribution, and when you're eligible you can go on there and schedule appointments, or at least takes you to links where you can schedule appointments. And then if you have specific questions that I did not answer during this lecture but you'd like to present them to me, then you can certainly email Carol Johnson here at the parish office, and she will sift those to me and I would be happy to answer them. So her email is cjohnson@seas, S-E-A-S, church.net. And I think that those will be listed for you here at the end of the presentation. I thank you all for listening. I really hope that this has been helpful, and I hope you all have a great day.